Hey guys, it's the Captain here for another Captain Meets with, arguably the guitarist's guitarist, to coin a sort of a well-used phrase here. So with the very lovely Guthrie Govan.
Greetings.
Who's taken some time out of an insanely busy schedule for the last 2 or 3 years. It doesn't seem to stop, does it?
Yeah. It's been crazy.
It is. So we're going to do like a Captain Meets kind of format. So we're not going to try and do tutorial or stuff like that. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to try and just sort of get to know you a bit better, and go back to your early sort of guitar playing memories and take you through to sort of now and the future. So what was your kind of family background? Was it a musical family that you grew up in?
Yes. I would say the main thing I learned from my family was how to listen to music.
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of vinyl floating around at home.
Excellent stuff.
And one of my earliest memories is seeing how people behaved when a new album came into the house.
Yeah.
And there was this almost religious ceremony where they put the circle of petroleum byproduct on the turntable and then sit back and absorb it.
Yeah.
So I realised when I was a tiny person, music is a serious thing. It's not wallpaper.
Yeah.
It's
an
art
do you think
form.
that I suppose is different now? Is a lot of young people's exposure to music perhaps is more disposable? It's not that religious experience.
For a lot of listeners, it's less religious, yes, because there's more music, it's more freely available. So I think there's less need for someone to spend a lot of time really getting intimate with something like an album.
Yeah.
Arguably, the album as an art form.
Yeah.
Is
with
not
the
as
sleeve
significant
notes
as it
and
was.
the artwork
And
the
idea, it's a song cycle. It's kind of 40 minutes worth of music, and you're supposed to start at the beginning, turn it over halfway through.
Yeah. You can't just sort of skip tracks because you didn't like the first 20 seconds of it. You've got to absorb it, haven't you? And what kind of music was in the Govan sort of household then at that time?
I would say a lot of 50s rock and roll.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of 60s blues rock type stuff. There was no shortage of Hendrix, Beatles, Stones, Dylan, Leonard Cohen, all that kind of stuff. But one of the earliest things that really excited me was hearing pre-army Elvis.
Right.
So
just early sort of rock and roll. Guitar. Right, okay.
I later discovered he had the same birthday as me, which was
cool.
Extra significant. I loved all that stuff, and Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
And when you're an idiot child, there's something about 50s rock and roll, it's just easy to respond to.
Oh,
because harmonically, there's no rocket science going on.
I always think if you want the absolute guaranteed, family get together, need to put some music on that everybody, from the 5-year-old to the 95-year-old is going to get into. It's outcomes, a Chuck Berry greatest hits album. You just can't go wrong, can you? It's all foot tapping stuff, isn't it?
Well, it worked for me.
And were either of your parents musicians?
My dad knew about 6 chords.
Okay.
And then, as he charitably pointed out to me,
so in those days, enough to be professional. I would have learned
more chords, but then you showed up. So he showed me everything he knew when I was very small.
Yeah, because I remember reading somewhere you started playing guitar at an age where I think most people would consider kids wouldn't have an attention span long enough to really pick much up. So, I mean, I know it's probably too far back to have any really vivid memories, but what was it about the guitar you think that as a 3 or 4 year old kid you just sort of went, oh no, hang on, I want to do this?
Honestly, the difference between the guitar and all the other instruments was there was a guitar in the house.
Right.
We didn't have a piano, we didn't have a trumpet, but there was like a nylon string, battered Spanish beast lying in the corner. Yeah. And I remember learning that chord back when my fingers probably weren't long enough to reach the wound strings. That's all they could manage. Yeah. But that's one of my earliest memories, just learning D.
Yeah. But that's still, because again, my little girl is 3 now, and I've got a little ukulele at home that's about the right, but she doesn't perceive it as anything other than something to go and bash for 2 minutes until it's boring, and then off playing with other toys. So, and I think she's probably indicative of most kids of her age. So clearly there were early signs in your life that you were going to be a little bit more obsessive maybe about the instrument than your average person.
Okay, so using your daughter as exhibit A, I guess maybe there is some nature as well as some nurture in my formative years. Yeah. It's hard to say with stuff like that because it's too personal. You can't be objective about it.
Yeah.
So all I know is music did make sense to me a very long time ago.
Oh, cool. And then, can you remember any kind of significant milestones, maybe between the ages of, 3 or 4 and, 10 or 12, or maybe where it became, were there like, do you remember a first band or
I remember a first gig when I was 5.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Don't be too impressed, you weren't there.
No.
I'm fairly sure I sucked, but it's okay. If you're that tall, it's okay not to be awesome.
I suspect still Mummy and Daddy were the proudest people in the room, it's just like little Guthrie playing a gig at 5. That's insane.
But it was a bunch of my dad's friends from work.
Yeah.
And I got up and played a bunch of Elvis songs with them. And that was my light bulb moment. That's when I realised, this is what music is for.
Yeah.
You get to make this disgusting, obnoxious noise on a stage, and you create this energy and throw it out there, and then the crowd gives you something back. It's like, wow, they like it. They're clapping, they're smiling. This is amazing.
You discovered that at 5, whereas I guess most of us are probably waiting until we're 15 or something to sort of get that first sort of gig vibe. So I mean, I said it, but as a relatively new parent, watching this little girl grow up, it's quite hard to comprehend how. Were you a confident? Do you think it had an inner confidence, or has the music always enabled you to interact with other people? At a sort of a different level to.
Yeah, I'd be incredibly awkward if I couldn't play music.
Right.
I like the idea there's something I can do with some degree of competence. And even back as a kid, there were 2 things I could do at a very young age. One was like play simple songs on a guitar, and the other one was I learned to read, just reading books when I was stupidly young.
Right. Okay.
So I kind of took comfort in those things, and they became my world.
Yeah, you must have been predisposed, I suppose, to just perhaps absorb. Whether it was written or music or whatever, but I mean it's fascinating really, because I know we're going to sort of skip a big chunk of life out, and we'll come back to it in a second. But I'm forever looking for that strand of DNA in guys that take guitar playing to a whole other level, and I'm fairly sure it's rooted in some sort of obsessive compulsive behaviour that just sort of says, look. There's something that draws me to that guitar that makes it okay to just sacrifice. I don't want to do anything else. I'm not interested in all the other kind of frivolity that youngsters will go and do. And then there's a period during your life, during that childhood stage and teenage stage, and somehow you just come out the other end of that with just a whole different level of technique and understanding to what I'm going to say normal people, but as in people that maybe just went, I'm going to play guitar, and I'll do 2 hours practice a week, and then of course you get to 16 and you're okay, but it's the guys that live, sleep and breathe it, just at a different level.
I guess it's always a little bit perilous to try and psychoanalyze yourself, but I will attempt to anyway. I guess in those early days, music was something of a safe haven. It was a retreat. It was always nice to come home from school. And I was a weird kid at school. I remember going there on the first day. Everyone knew the rules of football, and I didn't.
Right.
Whereas I knew a bunch of chords, and I was astonished to learn how many of these other people, the same height and age as me, didn't play an instrument. It's like, this is bizarre. I lack the training to deal with this new information. I thought everyone could play Elvis songs. So music was this thing where I would enter the world of music when I got home, and everything suddenly made sense.
And I mean, you and I are similar. I think you're a year older than I am, so that doesn't really count in terms of sort of, we'll have grown up with the same chart music and the same, Radio 1 playlists and all that kind of stuff. Did you ever feel, because I certainly remember that my early memories, so I guess I'd have been probably 8 or 9, something like that. I remember everybody at school being a massive Adamant fan, and I was a bit weird because my dad was like a big Steely Dan fan, and actually some other sort of classic rock, sort of Free and Zeppelin and things like that. Did you get a sense that your musical tastes were not, the popular?
Totally. Yeah.
And was that ever awkward, or did that make you, how did you find sort of kindred spirits that you could kind of jam with, or did you feel quite sort of isolated in that
There
sense?
was a degree of isolation. I switched off throughout the 80s.
Right.
Just that I have no interest in popular music of today.
Yeah.
I'm happy in my world of blues rock and a bit of jazz and a bit of classical and whatever I hear on TV.
Yeah.
And just whatever music excites me rather than whatever music is current.
Yeah.
So I never kind of hopped on the Duran Duran Spandau Ballet kind of wagon.
I mean that's sort of it's quite difficult to make those parallels with, you know, anybody that's watching this that's maybe under the age of 20 will not have grown up where there's really only one popular radio station with one popular playlist, and if you didn't like Duran Duran or Spandau or Human League it wasn't all bad, you know, you had things like Dire Straits, didn't you, in amongst that time, and, you know, the Police and stuff like that were charting with good music.
Meanwhile, someone was making an album called Fair Warning, you know. But
so
I don't remember that being rammed down my throat to the same extent.
But that would have been quite hard. That would not have been accessible unless you could go to the record store and know what you wanted to buy. And
it was probably more accessible on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm guessing
more radio
hairy
stations.
Rock with guitar solos was probably a bigger part of culture in the US than it was here.
I
remember just primitive digital synths forever. And that seemed to be the soundtrack of the 80s.
Yeah.
Even the 70s, we glamorise the 70s. We choose to remember like songs in the Key of Life or Asia by Steely Dan. But I was there, as were you. We were small people in the 70s, and actually it was mostly Bay City Rollers, wasn't it?
I certainly don't remember... I don't remember any being able to access any form of non-chart music unless you went out of your way to go to buy it, you know, or your dad, you know, your mum or dad bought it. You know, there wasn't.
Yeah, I mean that was certainly my source of entertainment, just rifling through my parents' fairly extensive music collection. It's like there's this whole treasure trove of stuff here that's stood the test of time. Yeah. And if they haven't sold this vinyl or burned it or whatever, then there must be something timeless and pleasing about it.
That idea of my dad sort of, you know, saying that if you want to listen to Dark Side of the Moon, it is you put the album on and you switch all the lights off and you just sit there and you absorb. You let them tell that musical story, and you just think nowadays, it's you download a track on your iPhone and you give it 10 seconds before you decide if you like it or not, and then it's just different, isn't it? And I don't even go. I'm not different bad, just different.
Yeah, it's possible people are getting better at multitasking or something like that.
Yeah,
but there is, it seems to me, some kind of death of the attention span.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would definitely
maybe you could trace that back to MTV.
Yeah, I suppose it's
everything had to be short bursts just to keep people.
Yeah, and you know, and the 80s. I think we can have some rose-tinted goggles about, you know, the 80s. You know, there was some, you know, Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith and, you know, AC/DC were all putting out, you know, good, you know, rock, you know, sort of good guitar-driven kind of rock. Oh, do you know what? I hate using the word good or bad in music. Just music that was of my taste versus not of my taste, I suppose. Well, look, let's go back to let's. So you've gone through your, you know, sort of childhood. You know, you're obviously early starter on guitar, early gigging performer. Certainly devoting your life to it. Can you remember a time in your childhood where you just thought, this is what I want to do with my life now, as opposed to, you know, doing it as a fun hobby?
That would have been later. I mean, the next milestone I should tell you about was probably when I was about 13, 14 years old, and started hanging out with older kids at school who had denim jackets with many patches sewn on, and I discovered I could tap into this whole world of the heavier side of things. Yeah. And discovered there was all this other stuff you could do on the guitar. I didn't know what tapping was or what sweep picking was. I was kind of happy in my blues meets rock meets jazz world. And suddenly I discovered there's a whole other vocabulary for the instrument. And the older kids would take great delight in kind of feeding the hippie kid like a cassette full of Dio or something like that, or Metallica.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, you go home and listen to this, then come back when you've digested it. We'll give you something else to corrupt your mind further.
This is mid-80s we're at now,
Yeah.
aren't we? Sort of early to mid-80s. So
there was basically 1 week where I heard Steve Vai for the first time. And
Okay.
I heard Steve Vai before I heard Eddie Van Halen.
right.
It was the same week when I heard Tony McAlpine and Yngwie, and it was around the same time I heard Frank Zappa properly for the first time.
So this was a humongous
That was just a
overload
lot
of
to take in.
Yes. But how did you sort of process that? You know, how would you master this whole new technique? And you know, what was a typical day in the life of Guthrie? You know, in those days, because you're obviously balancing school with guitar playing.
Yeah, I was pretty good at school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't struggle too much with the academic side of things, so I would make sure all the schoolwork was done.
Yeah.
It kind of mattered to me not to fail any exams or anything like that. I never really allowed that to happen. But having got that out of the way, I did spend a lot of time with the guitar.
Was it wake up in the morning, try and get 20 minutes in before you had to go and have your breakfast and go to school, and then come home and...
Well, it was more after school.
Was it an after school thing?
It's like wake up, it's like, okay, school beckons, let's get school out of the way, get homework out of the way. And now, instrument, and I would just play it till I fell asleep, and then wake up and play some more.
That's the difference, isn't it? Look at there's an attitude thing here. Just that little, I certainly remember when I was learning to play the clarinet at school, it was because my parents had told me, we've bought you a good Boozy and Hawkes clarinet, and you've got to go and see Mr. Smith, on the Tuesday after lunchtime for your clarinet lesson, and you must practice your half an hour. It's like, oh God, But you obviously didn't approach.
Well, practice is such an ugly word, isn't it?
Yes.
If you told me back then what you're doing is practicing an instrument, that would have been somehow a turn off.
Right.
I would have felt less inclined to do it.
Yeah.
Because practice implies discipline and hard work and concentration, and what I thought I was doing was playing.
Right.
And the implications of that word are manifold, aren't they?
And what would you play? Would you play to albums or just play on your own?
I spent a lot of time just jamming along with albums.
How much theory were you? How much were you making a conscious effort to try and understand what you were doing, or was it very much just all by ear? And
well, I tried to figure out some stuff about music theory anyway, because it fascinated me that it was possible to write music down.
Yeah.
There's this secret hieroglyphic language, and I wanted to understand the mechanics of that and how it worked.
Yeah.
So I knew the basics of music theory, and then something good actually happened in the 80s. Mm-hmm. We need to say that, for the sake of balance. One good thing that happened in the 80s was people like Yngwie turned up and said it's okay to have flawless technique, or someone like Joe Satriani would turn up and say it's okay to know all these unspellable Greek names for modes. There's no shame in knowing what you're doing. And before that, I think it was pretty un-rock and roll to know too much about how music worked.
Because it's funny, my earlier experiences with the guitar, I think, were towards the end of that, where it became uncool to not know all that. And then, of course, the early 90s, the big Britpop explosion, and flipped it back the other way to when it is cool to play the guitar if you only know 3 chords. So it's a really interesting kind of, throughout the 80s, you think it's sort of done that whole starts uncool to be technically super proficient and with a heavy theory knowledge, to by the time it got to the end almost feeling like you couldn't play the guitar unless you were willing to go on that journey.
Yeah, I guess it's cycles, isn't it? But I certainly remember meeting the occasional kind of grizzled local blues hero who would tell me stuff as a kid, like, you shouldn't learn all that theory stuff and sight reading, that'll destroy your natural feel. And in retrospect, obviously that kind of opinion can only come out of fear and insecurity.
Yeah.
Why would you tell a kid that?
Yeah,
there is that mythology, isn't there?
I guess that's that. So how do you balance that? Because I would say I think that there is a danger, and you do see it, particularly particularly I think with people that I meet that maybe don't go and play with other musicians and don't expand their horizons. There is a danger that you can become a slightly robotic, technique-driven player and lose some of that feeling and emotion that the blues guys would say that that's what it's all about. But you don't your playing doesn't seem to, your understanding of technique hasn't held you back in any way. Your playing is just as full as expression and feeling, as well as every mode there is under the sun. How do you
because that's what matters. If you can't play one note so that it means something, if you can't invest some of your identity and some of what you're feeling into the notes you're playing, then why are you playing? At that point it ceases to be art and it starts to be Super Mario, which of course is valid, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with doing the Super Mario thing and seeing if you can get the number a little higher than it was the last time. But it's not all of music, it's just an aspect of music. But that's not technique's fault, that's not theory's fault. I think sometimes that's the way it's portrayed to aspiring students of the instrument. And if someone gets this idea that what they have to do is perfect their technique and learn all of the theory, and then they'll be good, that's where it falls apart. It's great to have technique, it's great to know about theory, but ultimately your goal is to absorb all of that so it can just be running in the background.
Becomes second nature.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff a computer does that you don't see on the desktop because it would just be distracting. It's happening secretly, and that's where theory should end up. Sort of buried somewhere deep within you, and you can access it when you need it, but you're not consciously thinking about it.
And I guess that's the bit that and for me as a player, as a relatively not late starter, but late in terms of wanting to take it seriously, I think I avoid technique because if I am thinking about technique, I don't have the brain power to process anything else at the same time. So I just, where I'm most comfortable is to say, look, I know what I know, and I'm just going to take that and use that to best express what I feel works within the music that I'm playing to. But I completely agree that the watching someone like you play, and lots of other guitar players who are taking, as you say, just have that theoretical understanding of music as second nature, and they're doing essentially the same as what I'm doing, but just with I've got 3 colours on my palette, and you've got 300 colours on your palette, and it's just.
Well, surely it all comes down to the music you hear in your head. If you just close your eyes and imagine yourself creating some amazing music, what does it sound like? And then what kind of toolkit do you need to make that a reality, to get it out of your mind and coming through a speaker? And that'll be different for everyone because it's a mixture of your personality and everything you've ever heard.
So, what was the first, is the first big break for you when you won the Guitarist magazine award, or did you have was there a break before then that was bringing, sort of making you realise that you were going to be a career guitar player?
For the longest time, I just didn't think in terms of turning this thing that was natural and enjoyable into a job. If anything, I would be reluctant to cheapen it by turning it into a source of income when really it's just this spiritual release. Music was a friend, why turn it into a slave?
Okay.
So I was resistant to that until I found myself at Oxford University reading English. And it just hit me after about a year of being there. I'm reading fewer books now than I was before I got this place at Oxford, whereas I am playing several nights a week in a funk band and having a great time. And Mike Varney is responding to my cassette demo that I've sent to him and telling me he likes what I do and would I consider making a Shrapnel album. And all of that was going on, and I guess the Guitarist of the Year competition, probably a similar kind of time. I remember feeling thoroughly torn by all these different influences and just decided I have to pick one thing. And just watching myself from a distance, it's like, how does this person behave? You know, what clues are there here? And I realised I should.
Were your family supportive around you? Because I can imagine that's it. Like, you know, place at Oxford University is like, that's the dream, isn't it?
It's just a great way to make your grandparents happy.
Yeah.
But if you don't know why you're there,
yeah,
it started to bother me that other people would kill for this opportunity, and I'm kind of squandering it because I don't know why I'm here.
Yeah.
I think I'm here because I found it relatively easy.
Yeah.
And to me, music and the whole literature thing are aspects of the same big picture. You know, it's all language.
Yeah. So I remember the first time I met you was obviously after you'd won the Guitarist of the Year competition, and then you started teaching at the local music school here a little bit. And then I guess not long after that, the Erotic Cakes kind of thing happened, didn't it? Which even now I still think stands up as a, you know, it's just a fantastic, you know, set of guitar music, you know, that combines, you know, the good songs with insane guitar playing and musicianship from all the guys that are on that album. But, you know, tell us a little bit about that kind of the process of making Erotic Cakes and all the, you know, was that years and years worth of songs kind of going into?
Yes. It's a strange feeling for me now when I do a clinic and I say, and this next song is called, and some heckler will say, Waves!
Yeah.
I wrote Waves when I was like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And I'm very visibly not 19 or 20 anymore. So it's a strange thing to look at the kind of incubation time, like how much time elapsed between writing that and finding a bunch of people who want to hear it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of refreshing in a way to think that didn't have an expiry date. You know,
it
people
doesn't
still want to
feel
hear
dated.
it, and that's a nice feeling.
Yeah.
But it's also surreal.
But so, did you feel, did it put pressure on you? Because it was, actually, I don't even remember at the time, was it instantly well received, or what has it taken sort of time to seed itself?
Okay, the whole chronology there is a little bit hazy. I remember it was actually Paul Cornford who kind of pushed me to make the album and put in a lot of time and effort to make the album actually happen.
Yeah.
I was like, well, okay, I guess it couldn't do any harm to record a decent sounding version of these songs.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anyone will care, because this was before the whole YouTube thing took off, wasn't it? It was before people figured out how to use the internet.
Yeah.
So
I suppose,
unless
you've got some sort of label behind you, which probably wouldn't have picked up, you know, that style, the genre of music.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you get the word out? That's the tough bit, isn't it?
Even to the extent it was hard at first to figure out how well the album was doing or how many people were actually hearing it.
Yeah.
Now it's very easy to figure out. It's easy to count likes or to count hits or views or whatever. That album was being made just on the cusp of all the online developments that we take for granted now.
Can people still buy that album?
They certainly can.
Is that just an iTunes thing, is it? Or
it's an iTunes thing, or you could go to jtcmerch.com and buy a lovely physical copy.
Yeah, it's I mean, most of you guys will have, most of the guys watching will have undoubtedly have seen something that you've done on YouTube using one of the tracks off that album. But there's nothing, you know, do the right thing, people. If you enjoy listening to it, you know, do something that generates a little bit of income for Guthrie.
Yeah, I clearly need food.
But it's as I said, that was a ridiculous album that you know, really propelled you onto the kind of like, you know, boom, here I am. And so what you know, career wise,
Well,
did you start getting touring offers sort of once that album had kind of come out, or what happened after that?
Well, I should rewind for a little bit and fill in some gaps there. Like post-university, I ended up working at McDonald's for about a year and a half because I didn't know how to make a living out of music. I'd kind of done this dramatic severing of the link with academia. And it's like, okay, I'm actually totally screwed and totally on my own, and there is no established career path. So in the end, I had to invent a job for myself. So I thought, okay, what's something that comes naturally to me that other people would struggle with?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm totally self-taught, so in a way I'm an utter imposter, but my ear got fairly good because it had to.
Yeah.
If I wanted to learn something as a kid, I would just have to listen to a record or a tape over and over again. So I thought, how can I use that? How can I use my ear? I know, maybe I could be a transcriber for a guitar magazine. And there weren't any positions being advertised anywhere, so I just transcribed some of the hardest stuff I could find and sent it off. Dear Guitar Techniques magazine, here's an entirely unsolicited Sean Lane transcription. Please give me work. And they did.
Yeah.
So that was my kind of first rung on the ladder, just working as a transcriber. And it was through being a transcriber, I think, that some of the schools started to reach out.
Right.
And said, we note that you can transcribe Hank Marvin and John Petrucci and Tuck Andrus or whatever. We like you. Will you come and work at our establishment?
So I've got the chronology slightly wrong then, in that. So what, I thought Erotic Cakes was kind of mid-90s, or is it?
No, it was kind of mid-noughties.
Oh, okay. Sorry then. I've skipped
the
entire 10 years of your life out.
No, some of the songs are very old.
Right.
But yeah, from the schools thing, I started to meet people who were professional musicians who didn't play guitar.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a pivotal thing.
Yeah.
It's all well and good to hang out with guitar players all the time, but really, if you hang out with the rest of the musical community, you have something to offer them, and vice versa. You suddenly feel more useful.
Was there an instrumentalist that you felt particular synergy with? Is there,
the key point of this story is it was through working at the ACM in Guildford that I met Mike Sturgis, who was the head of drums there at the time, but also the drummer for the band Asia.
Yeah.
And then Asia, this would have been about 99, maybe 2000, Asia were looking for a session guitar player to fill in a lot of gaps on their long overdue album. And there were all these slots on the album where like Brian May was supposed to do a guest solo, or Steve Lukather was supposed to do a guest solo. There were just guitar-shaped holes everywhere, and nobody's diary was lining up auspiciously. So in the end, they drafted me in on Mike's recommendation, just to impersonate all these people, I think. It's like, can you do a Mark Knopfler fill there? Can you kind of do a Lukather lick here? And it started out just as this pastiche of various famous players who couldn't be on the album.
Right.
And then they invited me to go on tour with them, and that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah.
Just to be on a tour bus full of sweaty males for weeks on end.
Yeah.
Getting stamps in my passport.
And the males quite a lot older than you, I guess, as well at the time, weren't they? So just a real baptism of fire, like proper growing up.
But that was a really important thing for me, because I'd never toured like that before.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if you want to play music for a living, this is something you need to know about yourself. Can you hold it together? Can you stay sane?
Yeah.
Whilst on the road?
And could you? What was that?
Yeah, I discovered that I quite liked it. I mean, fortunately, that tour was like all good people.
Yeah.
There was a good energy.
Can you remember, what was your kind of favourite guitar solo-y, riffy thing at the time? Was there a particular song or a particular, what was it, the Brian May one or the Mark Knopfler one or the Steve Lukather one that you sort of...
I don't really remember. I remember being happy to be on that album in general.
Yeah.
The vivid memory is going into the studio on the first day, and they say, okay, this is the first track you'll be playing on, and they play me the guide track.
Yeah.
And it sounds amazing. And then I discovered that it sounds amazing because they have Vinnie Colaiuta on drums and Tony Levin on bass, and I think Elliot Randall on rhythm guitar. And it's like, okay, this is living.
Yes.
I could get used to this. So it was interesting to take that stuff out on the road. And in a typical Asia gig, we would have to play all of the early stuff, like Heat of the Moment and Only Time Will Tell and stuff like that, but also this slightly more AOR-flavoured pseudo Steely Dan.
Right, okay.
Kind of hyper-produced stuff.
Yeah.
Which is what the band were doing around the start of this millennium.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a fun gig
I was going to
from a
say,
guitar perspective. You got to cover different ground.
was that your earliest? No, not earliest, but when did the sort of the prog kind of? I suppose that's what you talked about Zappa, didn't you, earlier on? Was that were you sort of feeling that was kind of where that that love of that form of music had kind of come from?
I guess. I mean, it's a funny thing because now, having played with Stephen Wilson, and I have some kind of window of access into that world of largely British prog, that tradition, and Asia to some extent. Yeah. Although in retrospect, that was more of a manufactured pop group using famous prog elements.
Right.
It's like, let's round up all these kind of celebrities who are writing 20-minute pieces of music for their triple gatefold vinyl and put them together and tell them to write pop songs.
Right, okay.
That's really what the Asia formula was.
Oh, okay.
But I've kind of glanced at the world of prog from different angles, and yeah, it wasn't a huge part of my growing up. I didn't listen to a lot of Yes or King Crimson or anything like that. The stuff I do remember was Jethro Tull, which was amazing. And I'm sure you will get some YouTube comments about how I look like Ian Anderson.
Wow, it's easy.
It's fine.
Yes, it's easy.
I once met Ian Anderson's son at a Joe Satriani gig and couldn't resist saying to him, "I bet I get compared to your dad more than you do." And that just seemed to have everything.
That's interesting.
Like perfectly executed and have this folky element.
Yeah, because I always thought that the sort of the prog thing was more by desire than almost by...
It was just luck of the draw, really.
Luck,
I mean, to me, music is music. It's either good or it's not good. I don't care too much about swearing allegiance to a certain style of music. I like being able to mix and match.
So the Asia thing happened, and you toured with them, and you were on the album with them, and it's after that then, is it, that the Erotic Cakes thing came together?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fine. And was that? Did you tour Erotic Cakes much, or was
we tried? We had this core band with my brother Seth playing bass and Pete Riley playing drums, and we did a little bit of touring, but it was mostly one-off gigs and trade shows and stuff like that. Yeah. It didn't immediately take off. So and honestly, it was such produced, layered music on the album that trying to make it work as a trio.
Right, difficult to do.
It seemed to lose a lot in the translation.
So how did you, was it after that Erotic Cakes thing that you thought, okay, I probably, career-wise, I'm going to be, essentially a hired gun now, or did you always think, no, just going to keep trying to do my own music, or?
Well, I've never really had a plan. I'm the world's worst businessman. I can't kind of visualise where I'll be in 5 years' time or where I want to be.
Yeah.
I'll be at an airport in 2 weeks. I can visualise that.
Yeah.
But anything beyond that, it's not one of my natural strengths. But what I do is try and stay open to any potential opportunity. And every time a possibility presents itself, I just judge it on the basis of whether I think it would be fun, whether it would be interesting, whether I feel that my particular skill set would be able to enrich that music in any way. And the weirder the better.
Because you had a couple of years, didn't you, where you were doing a sort of a relatively mainstream kind of poppy. I don't think anybody necessarily saw that as, oh yes, that band needs a guitarist. I put Guthrie in that. That was a bit like, hello, the Dizzy stuff, and but.
Well, yeah, the Dizzy stuff came about through the Young Punks.
Yeah.
And the Young Punks is the brainchild of a guy called Hal Ritson.
Right.
Who I think is pretty well known in house music circles, and his production skills seem to be highly prized. But his twist on the whole dance music thing is he's the guy who understands real instruments.
Right.
He's the guy with the phone book. So if you want a Bulgarian choir or a string section or an amazing sax player or whatever, he can source those humanoids and add them to your otherwise electronic recording. So he's kind of found a cool niche for himself in that world, but there's a part of him that's still a muso. Yeah. We used to play songs like Waves when we were 21 years old back in the day. So I've always kind of been in touch with Hal.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of sample recreation work with his company. And sometimes I'll hear myself on like the Sugar Babes Christmas singles, and it's like, oh, I remember that 4-bar loop.
But that's kind of what I was getting at, really. You've come from this heavy kind of guitar centric, whether it's your own stuff or I suppose Asia's a bit almost everything centric, isn't it? But big instrumental kind of stuff, and then you're in a band where you might go 10 songs of just where it's just little funk chop. Did that ever sort of did that bother you, or were you sort of thinking, oh gosh, I'm bored of this now, or is it just it's all music?
There's always a kind of zen aspect. Whatever you're playing, however monotonous or simplistic it might seem, there's still a challenge. Is like, how perfectly can I play this?
Yeah.
I remember spending a summer doing a lot of Motown tribute gigs with this big elaborate band with many costume changes and stuff like that, and I'd be the guitar player, and all you have to do is, if you can do that, you've got the gig. But how much can you lock in with the snare? How short and choppy can you make those two chords? It comes down to like nanosecond timing, and it becomes like meditation almost. I want to see how perfect I can make this, and I'm happy to do that. It doesn't have to be me on a pedestal with the fan blowing my hair around doing sweep picking stunts. I don't need that necessarily. So I'm perfectly happy doing a pop gig thing. Dizzy I was particularly happy about.
Yeah.
Because we got that gig on the basis that the Electric Proms approached Dizzy and said, we've got you a choir and a string section. Mr. Rascal, would it be too much trouble for you to source the rock band that goes along with this? And Dizzy's people just reached out to Hal because we'd done some sample replay work.
Yeah.
And I remember us all trying to figure out how to be a rock band and play grime. Because you listen to the recording, there's no real instrument presence there. It's all chopped up samples. And I went through this whole thought process of I need the world's biggest pedal board, or I need MIDI guitar, or just trying to put on the hat of a musician trying to integrate with the electronic world. And in the end we realised, no, we should just be a punk band.
Right.
Because that's absolutely the spirit of grime.
Just
play just basic rock and roll stuff and play it with attitude, and it seemed to work with what Dizzy was doing, and I'm really kind of proud of what happened there, because it seemed like the meeting of these two disciplines. Instead of the musos in this corner of the ring and the electronic people in that corner of the ring scowling at each other, but just genuine collaboration, and something cool came out of it.
Yeah, I mean, we were watching a little bit of the Dizzy stuff on YouTube before you came down, and I know exactly what you mean. It absolutely does work, and it's a cool blend of, and it works live as well. It really, it's exciting to watch, I think. So
one of my favourite memories was we did a lot of rehearsal without Dizzy. The idea was that we would be a well-oiled machine, and then Dizzy would come in. He's a pretty well-prepared guy. I've never seen him make a mistake. He's always present. He's always ready to do the gig. But he turned up at the rehearsal, and at some point, I think he started singing a bass line or singing a horn melody or something, and the band instantly played it back for him, and you could see this light bulb. It's like, hang on, real musicians. And it was like the kid in the candy store thing. And you could see him kind of thinking, wow, this has so much potential. I've spent all these years with an Akai MPC. Meanwhile, mammal life forms can kind of understand what you're programming them with. All you have to do is sing it to them and they'll play it back. And it was a nice moment. It's like, okay, you're getting something out of this as well.
So after the Dizzy thing then, where do we go from there? Is that into Aristocrats kind of time, or is there a gap?
Let me think. I honestly don't remember. Well, the Aristocrats have been going for about 5 years.
Right.
I don't remember how many years ago the Dizzy thing was.
It was probably about, I think it was 2009, something like that. So there probably isn't much of a gap. I expect, a busy year or two of clinics and demos and stuff, and then into the Aristocrats. So how did you meet the two other guys, and what was the thinking behind forming that band?
The band told us to form it.
Right.
It was one of those things, almost a chance meeting.
Okay.
Marco and Brian had been booked to do a 30-minute gig at something called the Bass Bash, which is, much as the name would suggest, a bass-centric party that happens to coincide with the NAMM show in Anaheim every year. And it's actually a really good place to go if you're a guitar player and you want the world to leave you alone. Go and hide amongst the bass players, and you can just have a normal hang and not smile at iPhones all day. So the Bass Bash was my little best-kept secret thing to do after a heavy day of being screamed at and screaming at people at NAMM. But those guys had a 30-minute slot there, and originally Greg Howe was meant to be the guitar player, and then he had to pull out at very short notice. And I guess Brian felt responsible for filling this Greg Howe-shaped hole in the lineup. Some people on Facebook recommended me. He sent me an email, don't suppose you're coming to NAMM, would you like to play with us? So I said, okay. So we did the gig. We walked onto the stage just as three strangers who were contractually obliged to play for 30 minutes, and at the end of the gig, we walked off the stage like, we need to do more of this. Because there was this kind of cool telepathic, everyone is playing for the same reasons, kind of energy that we all felt.
Because that's the, talking to you on and off over the last 4 or 5 years, it's always felt to me that the Aristocrats has become, and we must talk about Stephen Wilson because that was obviously mega as well, but the Aristocrats has kind of become something in your, it's obviously fulfilling something much more emotional and deep than just it's another gig. It seems to me that's your baby. Of what
it's this. I've been waiting for an excuse to shoehorn in a Simpsons reference. The school orchestra in The Simpsons.
Yes.
And the teacher is Mr. Largo.
Right.
And generally, it's not a great orchestra.
Yep.
There's one episode where someone comes into the rehearsal room while the orchestra's playing and mutters something in Mr. Largo's ear, and okay, I have to go for a minute. I'll be right back. And as soon as Mr. Largo leaves the room, one of the kids in the orchestra says, now we can play the forbidden music. And that's kind of the Aristocrats for me. Everyone gets to play the forbidden music. Okay. Everyone can be as childish and naughty and silly and joyful, I guess, as we like. And I really like the way our three personalities come together, because everyone can play complicated music to some extent. But it's not at all, hey, check us out, tremble at the might of our chops. It's just, it's kind of funny to be able to do this. How can we turn this into something enjoyable?
Is that a conscious... I remember in the early sort of prototyping of your of your Charvel guitar here, I remember talking to you about you hadn't quite got the pick. I can't remember if it was the pickups or the pickup switching or whatever. There was a sound you were looking for, and you described it to me as your sort of like comedy sound, and I had this sort of vision, if you like, of the Aristocrats it is more than just playing songs, isn't it? It's trying to tell a story and evoke emotions, you know, almost perhaps like an actor or a poet would, or something like that. But so, you know, and it never really struck me. It's like, well, what does that mean? That's my comedy sort of sound. But you know,
I honestly can't remember why I would have said that, but it sounds like something I would say.
They might not have been the exact words that you used, but there was obviously a sort of a frivolous lick that you wanted to throw into a song, and having a good guitar tone for that, how we perceive as a good guitar, would have been inappropriate, and it sort of almost needed like a comedy guitar tone. I don't know which the song was or what the lick was or anything like that, but it right from then I think I'd begun to appreciate that, you know, the Aristocrats wasn't it wasn't just going to be a mainstream, you know, guitar experience. It's a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, one of my favourite things about it is it's not a guitar experience. It's about all three people, and in particular, it's about what happens between the three people.
Yeah.
And if I could somehow teleport myself out of this body and be in the audience and watch an Aristocrats gig, I think what I would enjoy the most is just seeing the eye contact and seeing how people respond to each other. Rather than just, now I'll watch the drums and see what amazing drum things are being accomplished, and now I'll look at the guitar, I'll stare at his fingers for a while. You know, the exciting stuff happens between the musicians. It's such a democratic operation as well. You know, it's about all three of us equally, which feels kind of right to me.
So what was it, if we talk about the Stephen Wilson thing, because obviously Stephen, you know, he's just a huge, you know, superstar, and playing, you know, big sold out theatre style venues with phenomenal music, you know, the level of the musicians in the band, you know, lots of instruments that you wouldn't naturally expect to see in, you know, your average kind of rock and roll band. Lots of incredible staging and lighting and all that kind of stuff. So what was that, you know, what was the Stephen Wilson tour like to do?
It's good. It was in some ways the opposite of the Aristocrats thing. Yeah. Because the overall mood of that music is a lot more somber. Yeah. It's probably happier than Radiohead, but it's not wall-to-wall jokes. Yeah. You know, there's a gloomier aspect to it. So, like I said earlier, it's nice sometimes just to change modes and not to have to play the same character all the time. So it was fun for me to have somewhere where I could be a little more brooding and dark and miserable, because that's what the music requires. Yeah.
Is it again? And I vaguely remember that somebody saying that despite the fact that the music was quite you know, clearly quite proggy, and you know, and obviously gave you plenty of scope to sort of, you know, go off on one if you needed to, but that Stephen was reining you back, you know, almost like, so it was almost like you were going somewhere and it was like, oh, maybe that's a bit, you know, it doesn't need to be that kind of out there. But do you remember anything like that from the Stephen Wilson?
I think Stephen has a kind of allergy to certain guitar things.
Right.
Obviously he's a guitar player himself. He has his own opinion about a lot of things. He hates chorus pedals, for instance. You're not allowed to use a chorus pedal if you are on Stephen's stage. Little things like that. But the guitar he hears in his head is very much not American. There's a certain kind of wide vibrato that he doesn't enjoy. Right. And he doesn't like more than a certain number of notes per second. Right. And that's a whole interesting area for debate, and we've had discussions about this. It's like, why is it that you hate it when a guitar player goes above 60 miles per hour, but you're fine with it when the sax player does exactly the same thing? And I guess part of it is just the tradition of the instrument. When you think of a certain instrument, you think of the history of that instrument and what famous guitar players have done in your chosen field of music for the past few generations. And I guess that the fast thing just evokes kind of poodle hair and animal print spandex and all of that stuff, and Stephen doesn't enjoy that at all.
I suppose, I mean, I certainly remember seeing a clip of one of the tracks that you were doing on oh, I'm going to get shot now, because what's the album with the word raven in it?
The Raven That Refused to Sing.
The Raven That Refused to Sing is the one. There's a scene where you're playing some crazy legato thing, and then with your other hand you're moving where you want the capo to be, and it's all seamless and not even think, and it's just like, it's such a different level of ability here compared, you know. So I mean, you must have had some fun though, didn't you? I mean, in that was, because that was another crack band as well that you put together, wasn't it? So
I mean, the thing that attracted me to that whole operation was the way I interpreted the whole Raven era in particular. Was, let's get a band of people with jazz fusion type chops to play 70s prog.
Right.
And that way you can fix the one thing that arguably was always missing in actual 70s prog. There's not a lot of real-time improvisation and interaction.
Right.
It seems a lot more scripted and planned. And maybe the gig would be the same from one night to the next.
Yeah.
But if you draft in, for instance, the guy who played keyboards with Miles Davis and a sax player, suddenly you can kind of reinterpret that whole prog tradition with an extra level of looseness and flexibility. Yeah. And I thought, cool, I'd like to be on board with something like that, because I can imagine how some of what I do might fit into that.
Yeah. So that was, I said that you did that for about 2 years, I think, didn't you? The Stephen Wilson thing. Was it
maybe
2
longer?
tours?
Well, 2 albums, and I'd say like 1.5 album cycles of touring. And then it reached a point where just calendar clash became an issue.
And it's been pretty much exclusively Aristocrats since, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, here's my thing. Whenever I have calendar issues, I just ask myself, okay, there's more than one situation here.
Yeah.
Which situation needs me personally more? And with the Aristocrats, that band needs all 3 members. You can't replace anyone in that band because it ceases to be the Aristocrats. Yeah. So I feel a certain duty to that. Whereas with Stephen's music, I'm not saying you could get any old idiot to play Stephen's music. It does require a certain level of competence. But you could get someone who isn't me to play the guitar in Stephen's music, and it will still be a great show.
Have you been to a show where Dave Kilminster's been playing? And
the only one I've seen was the Albert Hall show with all the special guests. So I got to play a little bit and then watch from the side of the stage.
What do you do when you see another guitarist sort of interpretation of a piece? Do you sort of sit, just go, I prefer my version, or do you sit and go,
well, not at all, because it's Dave.
Yeah, that's true.
Dave and I are really old friends, and I love Dave's playing, and I knew the gig would be in safe hands. Yeah. So if anything, I'm there at the side of the stage watching him and just smiling. It's like, cool. Yeah. See, Stephen, I told you he wouldn't screw it up.
No, he's very, very cool player. In fact, we should get him for a Captain Meets interview. That would be fun as well. So let's do a little bit of a rig rundown. I kind of, for me, you've always seemed to be a super Strat player, or as long as I can remember you. In fact, I say as long as I can remember. I don't know, my memory, I can't recall really what your sort of number one guitar was during the sort of Erotic Cakes sort of period. Were you still, was that Sir back in those days, or was that pre-Sir?
That was borderline. I think I just hooked up with Sir when we were recording that album. Yeah. So some bits of it were my trusty PRS.
Oh, okay. Oh, of course.
Because I was playing one of those.
I do remember that. That was Guitarist of the, around about the Guitarist of the Year stuff was PRS, wasn't it? Yes.
I mean, my first.
And what was that? A Custom 24.
Yeah. Yeah. My first decent guitar ever was a Gibson SG. Yeah. And then the PRS thing seemed like that's one way that you can combine what we like about brand F and brand G in one instrument. So you can either have the glued neck, mahogany-centric lump and then try and conjure up stratiness using wiring and trickery. Or you can start with the Strat formula and put these things in there and try and kind of create the more Gibson-y tones that way around. So different approaches to the one guitar that can do everything ideal. Yeah. So I was playing that PRS for a long time because it was unusually stratty. Yeah. Just acoustically, it was I don't know, just it had more brightness and sparkle than most PRSs. It was a little bit of a freak, I think, and it seemed to be nicely placed between those two camps.
Have you still got that guitar?
Technically, yes, but it's sleeping somewhere in the US. I think it lives in Las Vegas now.
Fair enough.
One of these times when I fly over to the US, I will actually take a detour and collect it. It would be nice to see it.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
It's a great guitar.
So PRS, and then the first sort of venture into the sort of the full Super Strat thing was the Sir.
Yeah, I met Sir guitars when I was doing a Cornford Amps clinic at a shop called Tone Merchants in maybe 2004, 2005. And the guy who was organising the clinic there said, "What do you think of this?"
Yeah.
And just gives me this Sir to try out, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
Because they do good work. Right?
They are, for sure.
It seemed very perfectly made and perfectly intonated and very resonant and covered a lot of sonic ground.
Yeah.
So I ended up using mostly a Strat style guitar, which you hear on songs like Waves, and a mahogany humbucker beast for all the meat and potato stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the bulk of the Erotic Cake sound. You hear the PRS on things like Fives. The solo in Fives was flown in from the demo, I think.
Right. Okay. So at the end, the Charvel guitar is a little different, I suppose, to the Sir in that it's because is it sort of different really? I mean, it's got a slightly different sort of trem system on it, hasn't it?
The story is actually very different. With Sir, I had a signature model for a while, and it was great. But it was more a case of, we build this guitar already. You can choose what colour it will be or what pickups will be in there.
Right.
But you're basically modifying this template that already exists.
Yeah.
Whereas this thing, Charvel said, we're happy to go right back to basics and just construct whatever guitar you think would work for you. We'll start from scratch. You have this crack team of like Fender Custom Shop beasts who will listen to your every whim. So there are certain things that are unique about this that wouldn't have happened if I'd started just with a stock Charvel and said, will you change this or change that?
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like the neck joint, that's what they do. That's Charvel, I can't take any credit for that. This I stole from Warren DeMartini. Yeah. So if Warren has the wheel so that you can adjust your truss rod easily, I would like that as well. Yeah. That was me.
I see, the Fender style.
This isn't a stand-up kind of gig, but if it were, that would be hooked over there. Yeah. I like the fact that when you're recording, you can do that and the jack socket's not in the way. Yeah. The pickups were custom wound just for this guitar. And this is actually where most of that 2-year period went. Yeah. Because it took a while to perfect this thing. It was the bridge.
What did you start off with on there? The traditional locking nut or a traditional Strat?
Oh, I was determined not to have locking nut. I hate locking nuts because I cut myself. Yeah. This string mute thing, you can destroy one of these in a gig just by sliding it over a Floyd locking nut a few times, and you can't do your Jerry Donahue stuff there. You can't do drop D tuning easily. For sure. With a floating bridge. So my starting point was, can we try the old-fashioned Brad Gillis style Floyd Rose with no fine tuners, and then just not bother with the locking nut? Yeah. If you make the nut properly and the slots are the right size and the right angle and the breaking angle where the string goes over there. Yeah. As long as you get all that stuff right and locking tuners don't hurt, you should be able to eliminate all the evil friction at that end. Yeah. Whereas at this end, with a traditional style bridge, the string is basically bending 90 degrees. Yeah. And if you like bending too far, you will have friction problems at the saddle. Yeah. So I like the idea of lock at this end, but not at this end. And then if you don't have a locking nut, you don't need fine tuners. So all of that metal work just goes away. And now it feels nice.
And how do you get round because I mean, so much of your playing is sort of, 2-note little licks where maybe one of the strings is bent and the other one isn't. How do you how do you compensate for the fact that the string that you're not bending should go slightly flat?
I mean, it is an issue, certainly. Right. Obviously, if you bend one string, all the others go flat. Yeah. So you can either lean on the bridge slightly to counteract that pull, or you can cheat, and I'm proud to say I cheat. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a tremolo. And and if you tighten these things, it basically becomes a fixed bridge.
Right.
And then if you need drop detuning, which I do for about half of an Aristocrats gig, you only have to adjust that rather than adjusting all 6 strings repeatedly. So this seems like a good solution to most of my guitar playing problems.
Yeah. And amp-wise, obviously, you were a long-time Cornford user, and more recently using another of Martin Kidd's fine inventions.
Yeah.
What was it that what is it that you like about his kind of signature tone, if you like? What is it that appeals to you?
I'm not good at describing tones. I guess I don't spend enough time on gear forums. I don't know the vocabulary that's required for that. But in basic terms, I think the guitar that Martin hears in his head sounds a bit like the guitar I hear in my head, and I recognise that in the way he voices things. And I like that you can have bucket loads of gain on this, but still there's clarity, and you still hear variations in pick attack.
Yeah.
And I'm all about embracing the fact that when you play guitar, you're a human. You are inconsistent.
Yeah.
I don't want every note to sound exactly the same as the note that preceded it.
Yeah.
I don't want perfectly even pick attack, then perfectly even dynamics.
Yeah.
I like imperfection. So when you listen to a phrase, every note has some kind of quirk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's cool if you can have an amp that's really high gain but still allows you to be flawed and human. So it makes a difference how you hit the note.
We had an interesting, or you hit upon an interesting philosophy, because I know you're a big Axe FX and Kemper user as well, and I think you're very well positioned to sort of say the situations where you think that's an amazing piece of kit, but the situation where you still want to go back to a guitar amplifier. So can you sum up pretty much what we were talking about before, what you feel about?
Okay, this is just my 2 cents, I guess. In terms of amp modelling, there's never been a better time to be alive.
Yeah.
Things are better than they've ever been, and better than we could have imagined they would be. If you think back to when the pod came out, everyone was marvelling at this kidney bean. You think how much closer things have got since early pod.
Yeah.
It's still not quite there, I don't think.
Is it, because we talked a bit, you were sort of saying there's for in-ear gigs and audiences and all that kind of stuff, really now, the Kemper Axe FX thing, or I'm sure there will be other brands out there will go, don't forget us, and I'm sure they are as well.
Get your own YouTube video.
But I'm sure they, it's just a solution that no one is going to sort of go, I didn't really like the sound of that. But you still said there's just something about sitting in front of a valve amplifier with a reasonable volume, and you talked about possibly even being a placebo effect. I think it's probably a tiny bit more than that, but can you just expand on what you meant about that?
For instance, for the Hans Zimmer gig, I used a Kemper. Mm-hmm. The sound man loved me for using a Kemper. He said it sounds great in the front of house. Yeah. And if you imagine that there are 80 people on stage and some of them are playing delicate, quiet orchestral instruments, this is not a time to unleash the stack of doom. Yeah. This is not a time to be selfish, because it's not your gig. It's not about the guitar. It's about serving the music. So there I was for the whole Hans tour with in-ear monitors and a Kemper, not moving any air on stage at all. Yeah. And it did the job. Yeah. Because I was playing guitar parts. Yeah. That's a slightly different thing to like doing a solo gig or doing an Aristocrats thing, where part of my job is to feel inspired. Yeah. So that I want to do unpredictable things. And I guess every player is somewhere on this spectrum. But I'm very much kind of dependent on what I hear coming out of the amp. The kind of tone that I'm hearing directly informs the kind of things that I want to play. I hear a certain kind of guitar sound, and it's like, okay, what notes would I like to hear? Yeah. Delivered in that accent. And there's something about just standing next to a real amp that's still just that little bit more organic for me. And I did the AB thing with a high profile modelling unit, which shall go nameless, and one of these amps, and I was ABing the two.
Yeah.
And I concluded that what happens in the front of house is close enough that no one in the audience would be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
However, if I can tell the difference,
yeah,
it'll make me play differently.
Yeah.
And that's where the placebo thing comes in. What if I'm wrong? What if it actually feels exactly the same on stage, but I don't realise it? And some stubborn Luddite part of my brain says, you'd play better if you had a real amp.
Yeah.
Maybe some of it's that, but also I just feel more punch still from a real amp.
It's
like 30 watts of that versus 600 watts of solid state power amp.
Yeah.
This somehow feels more visceral.
It's so... I'm constantly torn between... There's something in my brain... Well, not even something, I know what it is. There's a romantic in my brain that wants to justify why we should carry on making this kind of product as opposed to going down the digital route. And as you say, I am torn between how much of that is placebo, how much of that is because something is actually happening. I know it from a video that I've done recently where I wasn't allowed to know which was which amplifier. I most of the time said I preferred the sound of the Kemper to the profiled valve amplifier. Yet if I'm in a demo where I know it's the Kemper versus the, and because I can see it, I'm always preferring the valve amplifier. So you sit there just going, there must be some weird thing. But I'm a huge believer in what you said then about really, if you want to take your playing to the best level that it can possibly be, everything's got to be right. So even if it's placebo, it doesn't really matter. It's like, because
whatever gets the best result out of you.
Yeah, for sure.
But with the modelling thing, it's a law of diminishing returns now, isn't it? We're approaching the limit, and the curve is kind of doing that, and we're getting closer and closer and closer. And
how can it?
Every new development makes like 10% of the difference that the last new development made, and we'll never quite get there. We'll never achieve total parity. We'll just get closer and closer.
Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. Until I don't know what it is about. I suppose it probably is the what's the word for when something isn't the same every time? It is that sort of wonderful unexpectedness of maybe what a valve amplifier might do. That maybe that's where digital, because realistically, if you get right into the nuances, this amplifier will never sound quite the same twice.
No.
Because there's always going to be perhaps a slightly different voltage or the wear of the valves or whatever.
It will probably sound better at the end of the gig than it did at the start of the gig because it's cooking.
Yeah. Whereas I suppose that's with a digital product, it's kind of, well, that's how it's going to sound for the duration of its life. But we could go on about this, and I said I don't really. I'm just happy now, to be honest, that there is a really viable digital solution, because that's the one thing with valve amplifiers is they can often be impractical to take places, can't they? So
the digital solutions are great, but I don't think amp builders need to worry. There will always be a home for a real valve amp. People will always want that to some extent.
Oh, that's
It's the same reason. Why would people want a Rolex? Our phones tell the time more accurately than a Rolex, and yet people still want it. There's something about that craftsmanship and the idea of an object that's designed to do a certain job.
Like you say, it's not performance anymore, is it? It's this idea of this romantic view of what gear should be, as opposed to.
And it's inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah.
You think this is the real thing. This is a tub full of valves and transformers, and I can smell the heat coming off of it. It makes you play differently.
I agree. And just before we wrap up, I mean, I've seen you do stuff like this where there's like no pedals and you get the most insane guitar sound out of your fingers and this guitar and the amps you're using. And I've seen you traveling with a pedal board that's the size of a door and got a flip top on it, so there's another row of pedals underneath it as well. Do you have is there an ultimate kind of setup for you, or do is it just whatever you need to do the gig? Or
it's that you listen to the music and then say, well, what gear impediments are standing between me and being able to provide the optimum guitar tones to enrich this music? There's something I really like about not having a bunch of effects.
Yeah.
There's something nice about just guitar straight into the amp.
Yeah.
Be in the same room as the amp, be close to the speaker, so that
Yeah.
the speaker and the string can hear each other, and you get that nice feedbacky, sustainy thing. And just maybe a bit of ambience if you're in an unforgiving room.
Yeah.
There's something I really enjoy about
Yeah.
playing in that pure, uncontaminated
Yeah.
way. But it doesn't work in every gig. I couldn't just turn up and be Blues Guthrie and do the Stephen Wilson gig. You need effects for that, because that's a big part of the sonic picture.
Oh, well, that's cool. So no, well, look, it's been a super pleasure coming on. What have you got? What have we got to expect from you? More Aristocrat stuff, or might there be a solo album, or what might be in what's 2017 bringing for us?
Okay, there will be a lot of gigging. I'm probably not allowed to say what kind of gigging it is. It's something I've done before, and there will be a lot more of it.
Right.
By the looks of things.
But you can't say.
I shouldn't say.
Fair enough.
Aristocrats-wise, we have maybe 3 weeks more of touring.
Right.
And the one part of the globe we have neglected thus far is South and Central America.
Okay.
So we go there, we do South and Central America, and then we have to admit that's it. That's the end of the album cycle.
Yeah.
We've pretty much run out of places to play. So then we just relax for a bit, regroup, and start thinking about the next trio album. In terms of solo album, I'd like to hear my next solo album as well.
Right.
I'm really curious, because it's been a while, and Erotic Cakes is starting to smell a bit weird now.
In a good way, though. It smells great. Well, look, I really, really appreciate you giving up a day to come and spend some time with us here. I've found it incredibly informative and inspiring to listen to you for the last hour or so.
Pleasure was all mine.
No, thank you so much for coming along. So anyway, guys, if you're not familiar with Guthrie's work, where have you been? But I'll put some links in the description below. You can find out more. But for now, this is the wonderful Mr. Guthrie Govan. I've been the captain, and we'll see you next time.